The Steam House by Jules Verne. Translated by Agnes D. Kingston. Chapter 15. The Pall of Tandit. Having followed thus far the travels of Colonel Munro and his companions from Calcutta to the Indo-Chinese frontier, and seen them safely encamped at the base of the mountains of Tibet, we will leave them for a time in their winter quarters and devote a few pages to some other characters who have appeared in our story. Our readers may remember the incident which marked the arrival of Steam House at Allahabad. From a newspaper of that town, dated the 25th of May, Colonel Munro learnt the news of the death of Nana Sahib. Was this report so often spread before, and again so often contradicted, this time indeed true? After reading such minute details, could Sir Edward Munro still doubt, and was he not justified in renouncing all expectation of being able finally to do justice on the rebel of 1857? We shall be enabled to judge of this when we hear of all that occurred after the night of the 7th of March, during which Nana Sahib, accompanied by Bilal Rao, his brother, and escorted by most faithful companions, the Hindu Kalagani amongst the number, left the caves of Ajunta. 60 hours later, the Nabob reached the narrow defiles of the Satpuran Mountains, after crossing the Tapti, which flows into the sea on the west coast, near Surat. He was then 100 miles from Ajunta, in a part of the province little frequented, and thus tolerably secure for a time. The place was well chosen. The river Nerbudda flows between two ranges of mountains, the Satpuras on the south and the Vindhyas on the north. These two chains are entangled with each other in such a way as to form most intricate and safe retreats. On looking at the map, it will be seen that the Vindhyas form one of the great sides of the central triangle of the peninsula, about the 23rd degree of latitude, but that the Satpuras do not go beyond the 75th degree of longitude, and end with Mount Kalagang. Here Nana Sahib was near the country of the Goons, an aboriginal tribe, only half subdued, whom he hoped to induce to revolt. Gondwana is a territory of 200 square miles, containing a population of more than 3 millions. Monsieur Rousselet considers the inhabitants to be always ripe for rebellion. It is quite an important part of Hindustan, and, truth to say, is only nominally under English rule. The railway from Bombay to Allahabad traverses this district from southwest to northeast, and even has a branch into the center of the province of Nagpur. But the tribes remain as savage as ever, become refractory at any proposal of civilization, are very impatient of the European yoke, and, in fact, as they can at any moment retreat into their mountain fastnesses, are extremely difficult to keep in order. And this Nana Sahib well knew. Here, then, he determined to seek shelter so as to escape the search of the English police, and there to await a fit time to provoke an insurrectional movement. If the Nabob should succeed in his enterprise, if at his summons the Goons should rise and follow where he led, the revolt would doubtless spread rapidly and widely. To the north of Gondwana lies Bundelkund, which comprises the mountainous region, situated between the higher plateau of the Vindhyas and the important river the Jumna. In this country, covered with beautiful virgin forests, live a deceitful and cruel people, among whom all criminals, political or otherwise, seek and easily find a refuge. These provinces still remain barbarous, and here still live the descendants of those who fought under Tipu Sahib against the invaders. Here, too, are the headquarters of the celebrated stranglers, the thugs, so long the terror of India, fanatical assassins who destroy innumerable victims, though without shedding blood, as well as bands of Pindaris, who perpetrate the most odious massacres almost with impunity. In every part are swarms of the terrible dacoits, a sect of poisoners who follow in the footsteps of the thugs, and finally Nana Sahib himself had taken refuge here after escaping the royal troops, now masters of Jhansi. He, having thus thrown them off the scent, intended soon to go and seek a more secure asylum in the inaccessible retreats of the Indo-Chinese frontier. To the east of Gondwana is Kondastan, or the country of the Khonds. These people are the fierce votaries of Tado Panor, the god of the earth, and Manek Soro, the red god of battles. They are much given to those Mariyas, or human sacrifices, which the English have so long endeavored to abolish, and can only be compared to the savage natives of the most barbarous Polynesian islands. In 1840 and 1854, Major General John Campbell, with Captains Macpherson, McVicker, and Fry, engaged in long and troublesome expeditions against these daring fanatics, who will do anything under a religious pretext, if an unscrupulous leader can be found. To the west of Gondwana lies a state containing from 1,500,000 to 2,000,000 souls, occupied by the Bhils, formerly so powerful in Malwa and Rajputana, now divided into clans and spread all about the Vindhyas. They are almost always intoxicated with the spirit they obtain from the mikowa tree, but are brave, daring, hardy, and active, and constantly prepared to answer to the kisri, their cry for war or pillage. From this description it will be seen that Nana Sahib had chosen well. In this central region of the peninsula he hoped this time, instead of a mere military insurrection, to provoke a national movement, in which Hindus of every caste would take part. But before taking any decided step, it was necessary to settle in the country so as to obtain as much influence and act as effectively as was possible under the circumstances. This, of course, necessitated the discovery of a safe retreat, for a time at any rate, which he could be free to abandon directly it was suspected. This was Nana Sahib's first care. The Hindus who had followed him from Ajunta could come and go as they liked throughout the presidency, but Lao Rao, who was not included in the governor's notice, might also have enjoyed the same immunity had it not been for his likeness to his brother. Since his flight to the frontiers of Nepal, attention had not been drawn to his person, and there was every reason to believe him dead. But, taken for Nana Sahib, he would have been at once arrested, and this, at any cost, must be avoided. A single asylum, then, was needed for these two brothers, one in thought and aim, and in the defiles of the Satpura Mountains this would neither take long nor be difficult to find. A suitable place was at last pointed out by one of the natives of the band, a Gund, who knew every inch of the valley, even to its innermost retreats. On the right bank of a little tributary of the Nerbud was a deserted pall, called the Pall of Tandit. A pall is sometimes less than a village, and scarcely a hamlet, merely a collection of huts, or sometimes even a solitary habitation. The wanderers who inhabit it take up their abode there only for a time. After burning a few trees, the cinders of which improve the ground for a time, the Gund and his friends construct a dwelling. As the country is anything but safe, the house has all the appearance of a little fort. It is surrounded by palisades, and is capable of being defended against a surprise. Besides which, hidden in some thick clump of trees, or buried, so to speak, in a bower of cactus and brushwood, it is no easy matter to discover it at all. Usually, the pall crowns some hillock, with a narrow valley on one side, between two steep spurs of the mountains, in the midst of an impenetrable forest. It does not seem that any human creature could live there. There is no road to it, nor even the vestige of a path. To reach one, it is sometimes necessary to ascend the bed of a torrent, so that the water may wash away all traces of anyone having passed that way. In the warm season, men go up to their ankles in the water; in the cold season, up to their knees. Besides this, a perfect avalanche of stones and rocks is kept ready at the top, arranged so that even a child's hand would be sufficient to push them over, and crush anyone who attempted to reach the pall against the wish of the inhabitants. Isolated as they are in their inaccessible eyries, the goons can yet communicate most rapidly from pall to pall. From the unequal ridges of the Satpuras, signals are in a few minutes sent over 60 miles of country. A fire lighted on the summit of a pointed rock, a tree changed into a gigantic torch, a column of smoke on the top of a spur of the hills. The inhabitants all know what these signify. The enemy, that is to say, a detachment of English soldiers, or a squad of police, has penetrated into the valley, ascended the course of the Nerbudda, is searching the gorges in quest of some criminal to whom the district offers a willing refuge. The war cry so familiar to the ear of the mountaineers becomes a cry of alarm. A stranger might mistake it for the call of night birds or the hissing of serpents. The Gund does not so mistake it, however. It is a warning that he must fly, and so he does. The suspected palls are abandoned, or even burnt. The nomads escape to other retreats, to be in their turn deserted if close pressed, so that when the agents of the authorities at last make their way to them, they find nothing but ruins. It was to one of these places, the Pall of Tandit, that Nana Sahib and his friends came to take refuge. The faithful Gund, so devoted to the person of the Nabob, brought them to it, and there, on the 12th of March, they stationed themselves. The brothers' first care, after taking possession of the Pall of Tandit, was diligently to reconnoitre the neighbourhood. They observed in what directions they could see, and how far. They found out what were the nearest habitations, and who were their occupants. The position of this lonely peak, on which in the midst of a group of trees was the Pall of Tandit, was minutely studied, until they finally came to the conclusion that it was utterly impossible to obtain access to it without following the bed of the Nazur torrent, up which they themselves had ascended. The security this pall offered was undoubted, more especially as below it was a cave or tunnel, from which secret passages led out from the spur of the mountain, and afforded another way of escape when necessary. It was not enough, however, for Balau Rao to know only what the Pall of Tandit was at the present time. He wished to know what it had been, and whilst the Nabob was examining the interior, he continued to interrogate the Gund. "A few questions more," he said. "For how long has this Pall been deserted?" "For more than a year," replied the Gund. "Who last inhabited it?" "A wandering family, who only stayed there a few months." "Why did they leave it?" "Because the soil did not supply them with sufficient nourishment on which to subsist." "And since their departure, no one, to your knowledge, has taken refuge there?" "No one." "A soldier or emissary of the police has never set foot in this Pall?" "Never." "It has been visited by no stranger?" "By none," answered the Gund, "unless it was a woman." "A woman?" exclaimed Balau Rao. "Yes, a woman, who has been wandering about in the valley of the Nerbudda for the last 3 years." "Who is she?" "I have no idea who she is," replied the man. "Where she comes from I cannot tell, and not a person in the valley knows more than I do about the matter. Whether she is a foreigner or a native, no one has ever been able to find out." Balau Rao reflected for a moment, then resumed. "What does this woman do?" he asked. "She goes to and fro," replied the Gund, "and lives entirely on alms. Everyone in the valley has a kind of superstitious veneration for her. I have several times myself received her in my own Pall. She never speaks, and is generally supposed to be dumb, and I should not be surprised if she were. At night she may be seen straying about, holding a lighted torch in her hand. For this reason she is always known by the name of the Roving Flame." "But," said Balau Rao, "if this woman knows the Pall of Tandit, is she not likely to return to it while we are here, and so cause us some danger?" "Not at all," replied the Gund. "She is mad. Her senses have fled. Her eyes gaze without seeing. Her ears listen without hearing. Her tongue cannot utter a word. It is as though she were blind, deaf, and dumb to all that goes on around her. She is quite mad, and madness is a living death." The Gund, in the language of the hillmen, thus traced the portrait of a strange creature well known in the valley under the name of the Roving Flame of the Nerbudda. This was a woman whose pale, still beautiful countenance, worn, though not with years, and quite devoid of expression, betrayed neither her origin nor age. The wild eyes looked as though they had closed to all intellectual life on some terrific scene, the horror of which still lingered in them. The hillmen always received this poor, inoffensive creature kindly. Like all savage people, the goons hold persons who have been deprived of reason in a sort of superstitious reverence. Roving Flame was hospitably welcomed wherever she appeared. No pall was closed to her. They fed her when she was hungry, gave her a bed when she was weary, without expecting a word of thanks from the poor speechless mouth. For how long had this woman led this existence? Where had she come from? When did she first appear in Gondwana? Why did she rove about with a torch in her hand? Was it to light her path, or to scare away wild beasts? It was impossible to find out. Sometimes she disappeared for whole months together. What became of her then? Did she leave the defiles of the Satpuras for the gorges of the Vindhyas? Did she wander beyond the Nerbudda into Malwa or Bundelkund? No one knew. More than once, when her absence was prolonged, it was thought that her melancholy life had ended. But no, she always came back, still looking the same, for neither fatigue nor illness nor privation had any visible effect on her apparently frail body. Balau Rao heard the native with extreme attention. He considered whether there might not be some danger in the circumstance that Roving Flame knew of the Pall of Tandit, for, as she had already before sought refuge there, her instinct might lead her back to it. He therefore questioned the goon as to whether he or his friends knew where the mad woman actually was at the present time. "I cannot tell at all," answered the goon. "For more than 6 months no one has seen her in the valley. Possibly she may be dead, but even should she reappear and come to this Pall, there is nothing to fear from her. She is but a moving statue. She will not see you, nor hear you, nor know in the least who you are. She will just enter, sit by your hearth for a day or even 2, then light her torch and begin again to wander from house to house. That is the way her life is spent. But since her absence this time has been so prolonged, most likely she will not return again. The mind died long ago, and now the body must be dead also." Balau Rao did not attach sufficient importance to this incident to think it worth mentioning to Nana Sahib. The fugitives spent a month in the Pall of Tandit, and as yet Roving Flame had not returned to the Nerbudda Valley. End of chapter 15.